Welcome to Champions of Change, the Rise podcast. I'm Ian Cutler with Rise. With new episodes every other Tuesday, we speak with athletes and leaders in sports, giving them a platform to tell their stories and share their perspectives on issues of race, social justice, and athlete activism, and discuss the power of sports to improve race relations and bring people together. You can subscribe, listen, and follow Champions of Change, the Rise podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and SoundCloud, or visit our website, risetowin.org/podcast. Also, be sure to follow Rise on Twitter and Instagram at Rise to Win and on Facebook at Rise to Win ORG. That's RISETOWIN. Our guest today is Seth Waugh, the CEO of the PGA of America and a member of Rise's board of directors. Seth joins us to talk about how the golf world has been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic and how, as an organization, the PGA is addressing the virus, from preparing for a safe way to hold major tournaments later this summer to supporting its thousands of workers and employees as the world has come to a halt. We also talk about growing the game and how the PGA is striving to make golf a more diverse sport and a more inclusive environment. And with that, we also talk about what it takes to be an inclusive leader, especially during a crisis, and touch on the latest topic of our Rise Digital Learning series, which is privilege. How does understanding your own privileges help you be a leader for inclusion and put you in a position to address social inequities and create opportunities for others? How is golf as a sport overcoming its history of being an exclusive game and using the sport today to drive diversity and inclusion? And as a reminder, if you're interested in learning more about our digital learning series and this week's topic of privilege, you can check out www.risetowin.org/digital learning. Seth Waugh is CEO of the PGA of America and a member of Rise's board of directors. So thanks so much for coming on and taking time to join us here on Champions of Change, the Rise podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm flattered to be asked to do this, and even more flattered to be on the board, doing all the great work that you guys do every day. So, thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. I guess first, let's just ask, how are you doing? How's your family doing in dealing with this whole pandemic?
Yeah, we're good. We we have to suffer through it in South Florida, which is a little better than lots of places, right? It's been kind of 80 and sunny since we got locked down, which helps a little bit, but it's a little bit like, Christmas morning without the presents. You're not allowed to really do much. But we're very lucky. We have 5 children, and they've all been with us this whole time, and as well as a couple of refugees from New York City, a niece and a goddaughter. So every day is really grindy, long, kind of endless. You kind of get up, sit in your chair, and you look up and it's dark out, and you really didn't have much of an agenda, but you've been can't remember being busier. So that part is a long grind, and then I kind of come out of my cave and it's a little bit of a party. You're kind of reminded. I hope everybody else is getting these silver lining in this horror, right? Is that you're reminded of what's important, and the family time has been extraordinary. Our kids are all kind of mostly launched. A couple are still in school, and we never thought we'd have it again. It's high school all over again, and it's game nights, and we have theme night every Friday night, and break up odd and even team to do all the housework and the cleaning up, and it's like a Little House in the Prairie with internet, right? So it's that part of it's been interesting.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're all healthy and finding ways to get through together. Obviously, it's had a huge impact on the sports world and major tournaments like the PGA Championship and U.S. Open, Masters, all been pushed to the fall, late summer. I think the Ryder Cup was always scheduled for the fall and is still not been moved yet. But can you share just the latest on what's going on with the Pro Tour, some of the major tournaments, and just the status of professional golf in general?
Yeah, look, I was in New York and ran a bank for a number of years, and I thought I was through the crisis. I was getting out of the crisis business, right, by coming into the sports world, and having lived through 9/11 and lost the building in that one, and the bank did, and obviously the financial crisis. So it's it's been a really interesting exercise, and very different, very similar in some ways, and very different in the others. In the sense that the cure is is the exact opposite, right? Like in 9/11 and the financial crisis, you're trying to create confidence, activity, get people out. And in this one, you're obviously doing the opposite. It's sort of committing economic suicide, right? So we're just hoping that we can kill the disease before we kill the patient, right? And so that's a lot of what's gone on. We get up, we're an interesting organization in that we, we own two of the, in the men's world, two of the, the five majors, if you include the Ryder Cup as one of them. And in the women's world, we own one of them. And so we're in the very highest level of the game. And yet our real mission is to serve our members and grow the game, right? We're the largest sports organization on the planet. We got 29,000 members, and so we get on television a couple, 3 or 4 weeks a year. But the rest of the time, we're out, kind of trying to make our lives better for 29,000, so we can make millions of lives better through the game. And so when we think about what we're doing, there's the professional side of it, and that's been a great exercise. If you were setting up golf as a business, you wouldn't set it up the way it is now. There's 5 or 6 governing bodies, and yet which really doesn't make a lot of sense on paper, and yet we work as one. And so when we sat down to try and figure out how to reintroduce the game, how to sort of have a real season here, we acted as one. And I remember saying, and Jay Monahan runs the tour, has been an amazing partner throughout this, has really thought about the game as opposed to self-interest. When we sat down, I sort of said, look, we need to be the board of directors, if you will, for the game, right, and act in the best interest of the game at all times. And if anybody did get self-interested, the crowd sort of got them back to where we should be in terms of the game. So I'm proud of how we operated. Some of the other sports, tennis being one, didn't act that way, and we have been very united. So we have what looks like a most of a season, if you will. Hopefully, the PGA Tour can start in June. Plan is to start 4 events or so without fans, and then gradually work them in. And it's a little bit back to the future for us. We had moved from August date, which had been a historic date in PGA Championship, to May last year. Did it in New York at Bethpage. Had a great experience, and now we're back to the future in terms of going back to August, which we were kindly offered that date. We're excited about it. We will be this year the first major that comes out. And we're willing to do it, with or without fans. We hope to have it as normal as it can be, but realistically, it may be a very modified version. We think, doing it without fans is the right way to think about it. We're trying to create content and distraction. We think, golf and sports in general can be part of this healing process. Thankfully, golf has a lot of advantages in terms of how we stage things. There's a natural distancing. Right. There is physical contact. You're playing over a couple hundred acres. So, even if you had, a few hundred people on 200 acres, that's different than obviously 100 people in a bar, right? And so, we're all working on protocols now, how to handle these things and do it safely and responsibly. And obviously, we're only going to do it if it makes sense. And we're in constant contact with San Francisco and the state of California about how it'll work. And if we only want to do great things for their city, and if they're uncomfortable in holding it, we'd look to perhaps move it somewhere else if someone else could safely hold it. But that's way down the line, and right now we're excited about that. And then we've got a Ryder Cup scheduled in September, which would be a great exclamation point to the whole season. With the Olympics being canceled, we're sort of a little bit of a replacement for that in the sense of nationalism and patriotism and all all that goes along with that. So again, very collaborative. We're excited about where our position is in it, and we're hopeful. I'd say the other thing that we're working on, again, that's kind of the professional side of it, on day to day of what are we thinking about? It's about, serving our members, right? And serving the game. So we wake up every morning and saying, okay, we're a perpetual institution. We like Rise or a non-for-profit. We're mission based, my job is to generationally make sure not that we just survive, but that I can hand it off in a better position than I found it, right, to the next generation of leaders. And so, we're all about that and waking up and making sure financially we're stable, that our people are safe, that everybody in our orbit, is there. And the next thing we think about is help. How do we get everybody to the other side of this thing? Like, it's going to end. That we all know that, but sort of getting there is the challenge. And so we've done a lot with our, we're set up a bit like a government. We have 41 sections out there. We want to make sure each one of those, our local delivery mechanism is safe and sound, and we're doing financial planning with them. And as they, businesses are closed, it's hard to go from full revenues to zero, obviously, in all these businesses. And we're, doing that. And then, delaying dues as much as we can on the member side. And then also we launched a week or so ago a golf emergency relief fund, which isn't just for our members, which is for the industry. And golf is an $85 billion industry. It's got almost 2 million people that work in it every day. And it's full of, small businesses, which are the facilities. It's full of entrepreneurs who are either owners or professional coaches. They're independent contractors. All of the at-risk kind of populations, exist in golf. And so we very much wanted to be helpful in any way. So we think the government is doing some really interesting things around SBA loans and PPP and all these things that are helping people. And we wanted to have something specific to the game. So we scraped up about $7.5 million, which is made up of some savings that we found in our business, some of our reserves, and then generously my senior management team has foregone a significant part of their compensation. We're giving it directly into the fund. Our board of directors has done sort of the same thing, and so we're hoping the first 5 is cash. The second 2.5 is to match, because we want to bring in other friends in the industry and of the game, and we're hopeful that we could raise significantly more than that in a variety of ways to help the industry. So we just wanted it to be golf, helping golf, if you will.
That's great. I mean, and you brought up a few things I wanted to ask about anyway, like the relief fund being one, and also just the concept of people would naturally think that, oh, golf is one of the sports you could play during a time like this because you have so much space and you can socially distance and whatnot. But like you're saying, you have to consider everything that goes around just the 2 to 4 people playing, on a given course or on a given hole. Just people who maintain the course.
Absolutely. So it's, 2 functions of it, right? Again, on the professional level, you obviously could have thousands of fans. If you do it without fans, it's still probably, we think somewhere around 750 to 1,500 people that are there to, volunteers and media and television crews and officials and caddies and players. And so going through the protocol of making that all work is something we're very hard at work in, and again, collaboratively with the tour. And we're convinced that we can, in the next month or so, come up with the right sort of protocol. Yeah. As far as, the game every day, you couldn't be more right. I mean, at its core, golf is a walk in the park, right? If you or I were going to go out on an empty golf course carrying our own bag and played 18 holes, then, that'd be pretty safe, right? If you make that, a member guest with 150 people at a cocktail party, that probably doesn't work for a while, right? And so what is it, in between that we think is kind of the safe and responsible way to play golf? And so from the beginning, we've tried to sort of put ourselves in the seat of the CDC and say, okay, if we're the CDC and we want to make golf part of the solution as a part of the problem, how would we approach that, right? And so we have come up with what we think are kind of that safe version of golf that allows people an outlet, somewhere to go and do something, and do it with your family or housemates or whoever it might be. We're not saying interact, It's minimum of staff because we obviously don't want our members or our staff to be at risk. And it's, kind of golf in its purest form. And we've evolved that now to the point where we're kind of modeling it after the White House's idea of 3 phases, right? So first phase is this minimalist part, which you could do, safely, even perhaps in a stay home kind of situation. Second phase adds in certain services, and the third phase goes beyond. And I just want to be clear: we're not trying to convince any county or local authority or health authority to allow golf.
Right.
That's their job, right? That, we're just trying to say, if they want to allow golf, here's how we are best practices in terms of doing it. That, we're not health experts, we're golf experts. So we have, tried to work hard, and we've gotten, health experts to sign off on our protocols, as, we should. And hopefully golf, again, was going to be the first out, both professionally as well as, to a certain degree, in a large way, participation-wise. We actually are, again, the kind of hopeful silver lining kind of idea is that, we hope this could potentially be a growth opportunity for the game in the sense that people are going to think about it differently, right? Think about it, okay, it is a walk in the park. That is a safe activity I can do, even in this, brave new world that we find ourselves in, after the fact. So we're hopeful that all golfers will come back. We're pretty convinced of that, but maybe we get some new entrants as well.
You're someone obviously who leads a major sports organization and like you mentioned, thousands and thousands of members and employees and whatnot. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the value of inclusive leadership and what that means to you, and what are the specific qualities that are required to lead an organization like this, like the PGA during a crisis that we're facing, and maintaining that those values of inclusivity.
Yeah, look, I hope they're sort of the same thing, right? I like to think they are. I think leadership is kind of leadership. It comes in a lot of forms, but you know it when you see it, right? And so I think, look, on the I'll try to let me do the crisis first, and then I'll come back to inclusivity, which I think is embedded in I know is embedded in everything we do. I think, again, having run a bank through a couple of crises, you can either, be destroyed by it or become better for it, right? And I think there's an opportunity to differentiate yourselves, and I mean the institution, probably some individuals as well, in how you handle it, right? And I think, a couple principles. One is that, as a famous general once said, every plan's a good one until the first shot is fired, right? And so, we wake up every morning not knowing, what we're going to face that day, and that's particularly true in the beginning of a crisis. It starts to, as the panic curve sort of peaks and settles down, you begin to be able to kind of build futures as opposed to put out fires, and so there is a bit of that, but along the way you're going to have to call a lot of audibles, to use a sports term, and the quality of those audibles, I think, defines kind of how you your success of how you've done in that crisis, right? Because that's the battlefield kind of decisions you're going to have to make, if you will. I think the other thing is that you have to be, obviously, be smart, right? So you got to make smart decisions in the time. You're going to make some decisions that 2 weeks later or 2 days later or 2 hours later are going to look stupid, right? Because the world's going to change, and so again, those audibles, but you're trying to be as smart as you can, as thoughtful as you can, and as long term as you can be along the way. But the more important factor, I think, is to be human, right? I think in this, there's so much pain going on in this crisis, right? And that's why we started our relief fund, and why all these great things are coming from various companies and charitable things, and global citizens, and all the things that are going on. And so we are safety first. We think about our employees and our members and everybody that we come in contact. We want to be the best partner we can be with all of our financial partners and our other kinds of partners to get them to the other side of this thing. And so I think if you can prove, through a crisis, that you have both a brain and, more importantly, a soul that your chances of coming out of this not only intact but better is enormous. I think these are the times that define you. It's kind of like how not only what you do but how you do it. How did you behave? And if you do that, I think your brand improves, your culture takes leaps, which we're seeing. I feel like we've been remote for almost 6 weeks now, and yet I don't know that we've ever been closer as an institution. We're talking all the time. We're checking in with each other. We're finishing each other's sentences almost, right? And that's a great thing. I think you can. Again, so come out of it more united. You're going to come out of it certainly smarter, and I think, in fact, better. So that's the goal, right? It's going to change us all forever, as did 9/11 and the financial crisis and other. And the question is, as a leader, how do you make sure that's for the better? You're better for the journey as opposed to worse. I think inclusiveness is a part of our DNA, is a part of my DNA. I think I was lucky, and I was a son of two teachers and grew up, sort of in a very progressive, household that, we didn't put people in boxes. We didn't, I just never thought of it that way. And I don't mean that I'm anything special. I was just lucky enough to be raised in that way. And I think that's the way institutions need to be. And we historically, as a game and as an institution, have been, haven't been as diverse or, as we should be. And I think as a result, we're very intentional about it, and we should be, and we're making pretty good strides in that front. There's still a lot of work to do, but we've certainly done that. I think you have to be aware of what experiences you haven't had, like what blind spots you might have, not intentionally, just sort of from who you are and how you've lived your life, and make sure that you're intentional about inviting that viewpoint, all those viewpoints, into the conversation, and making sure that you're really thoughtful about that, because that's how you're going to make good decisions. If you make a good decision with half the information or half the data, there could be a great decision off of what but until you know the whole picture, you can't make a fully informed and great decision. And so, again, I don't know that we're, being any more inclusive in this, but we're certainly not going to be any less. It's as important or more important than ever. But I think again, you've got to get it into the DNA. And our Sandy Cross, who runs now is our chief people person, started the D&I focus a few years ago, and she's done an amazing job of changing what was, and it gives you a lot of hope that here's a very staid and 100-year-old institution that has changed enormously in the 4 or 5 years that I was on a board and now leading the organization.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of going there a little bit, because we do want to talk about that for sure, and want to get into some of the specific initiatives that you're referencing as far as what PGA is doing to grow the game, make it more inclusive. But you mentioned something interesting, about just kind of taking toll of your own experiences and not necessarily realizing, the impact that other people's experiences may have had on their life that you may not be aware of, so that we each have our own different way of going about life, and each face our own adversities that, I may not be aware of the things that you've gone through, you may not be aware of the things that I've gone through, and it's the same for everyone. And that's kind of when we talk about privilege, right, is a concept, is something that we're talking about now in our digital learning series, trying to really understand those differences, where they come from, and the context of them, especially in respect to aspects of our identity, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. So we can then appreciate ourselves and know how to address those inequalities, right? If we understand our own privileges, we'll know that, how to address some of the disadvantages that others might have because of the advantages that we have.
You're absolutely right. I as I said, my father's a teacher. He taught at a school that taught what's called the Harkness method. And the Harkness method is designed around a table, and it's an oval table that only 12 people can sit around. So by definition, it's a small class. So the teacher is one of those 12 people. And the idea of the teaching method is that more than 50% of your grade is done by your participation around the table. So it's very discussion based. And the idea of a great Harkness teacher is that he or she would remove themselves from the conversation during the course of the semester so that the kids are actually teaching themselves. So you learn to listen, you learn to sort of you need to learn to talk. You need to sort of make sure you understand what your view is, but share it and be collaborative by nature. And I think if we could have the whole world was one giant Harkness table, we'd be in a lot better spot than we are, right? Because to your exact point is knowing what you don't know is really important, and being I've always thought that being a good leader means you're a better listener than you are a talker. That I go into everything I go into assuming I'm going to learn more than I'm going to teach. I'm sure that'll be true today too. And I think if you have kind of that perspective and your willingness to not go, you might come into a meeting with a point of view, but you've got to have a willingness to leave that meeting with a different point of view, not because you're weak, but because you're strong. And because you are willing to listen and have your mind changed by other perspectives. That you just can't have every perspective on earth, but you have to welcome them all.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that you have at the PGA to grow the game and make it more inclusive, kind of get over that hurdle that you mentioned about historically with golf not being as inclusive as it probably should have been. So tell us about, I know you have different programs, PGA Reach.
Yeah, we do. And let me give you a couple of, a couple of sort of, starting points, if you will. And just a couple of fun facts. And let me start with the premise that, again, golf is this incredible engine for good in our view, and certainly in mine. And it does an enormous amount of charitable work, and that's pretty well advertised. Most sports borrow our sport to raise money, frankly, in a lot of ways. But more importantly, the life lessons of it, the values that are associated with the only game on earth where the ethos is you call yourself on cheating, not that you're trying to get away with it, right? And the kind of morals and the politeness and the fact that you're outdoors in beautiful places, the relationships you build, all those things, which is why I'm flattered and it's a privilege to lead this organization. And so we start with that premise and then add into that if we can make the game look a little bit more like the world, then maybe we can make the world look a little bit more like the game, right? And that's at the end of the core of kind of how I think about it anyway, and I think how we all do. It does have a stigma of exclusivity and wealth and a lot of things around it. Not all of that's actually true. About 75% of the golf courses in America, 80% are public access, so there is plenty of access, and it's actually fairly inexpensive on average now. It's about $35 to play a round of golf, right? Which, for 4 hours of entertainment, whether you're going to a movie or a baseball game or a lot of other things, that actually starting to look, pretty reasonable, right? There's different ways to consume it. You don't have to play 18 holes and have a scorecard. You can go play 9. There's plenty of short courses around. Top Golf is growing 30% a year, which is not quite, the golf that we grew up with, but is, golf, right? And it's kind of like, if you went out and shot, played horse with your son, or you played 2-on-2, that's basketball, right? It's not, 5-on-5 with a referee and a full court, right? And so I we all ought to think about golf in the same way. And sometimes if and when we ever get back to going to restaurants, like some nights you want to dress up and go have a great French meal, and other times you want to go get a burger at the corner, right? And so, there's different ways to consume it. And so we want to make sure that we make it as welcoming and as affordable and accessible as it can possibly be. I think the game has done a lot over the last kind of 2 decades to slowly kill itself, right? We've made it, kind of harder to understand. More, the rules were hard. The traditions were firm. That they didn't feel very welcoming. It was expensive, and again, didn't look like much like the rest of the world. And so we've got to break all that down. We had this 20 years of like, the harder you could make the course, the better, right? And that's sort of how you defined it. Instead of like, you know what, I play golf to have fun, right? So I actually want to play a happy golf course. I don't want to play a hard golf course, right? And so I think most people are, at their core would, prefer that. And so we're making it fun. Like, this is a game that started out, with, shepherds in a field with a rock and their staff knocking it into rabbit holes. Like, this is a kid's game, right? Like, so let's make it fun. And so one of the real green shoots, and I mentioned Topgolf, but one of the other real green shoots in the game is what we have is called PGA Junior League, and it's youth. Think of it as Little League Baseball for golf. You play on a team of 10. You've got one partner that day that you play 9 holes, so it's not overly time consuming. You play what we call a scramble, which is you take the best shot from each of you, and you play 3 matches within 9 holes. So even if you have a bad 3 holes, you have a chance to kind of come back and get points, right? So it's a fun format. It's boys playing with girls. It's ages 18 to 14. We'll probably extend that age group because of the popularity of it. It's first timers playing with, great players, right? And they're making them better. You get a uniform, you have a coach, you have your name on the back of your uniform. And that's growing 20 to 25% a year. And by the way, the thing that we're most proud of is that is now up to about 35 to 40% girls, whereas the game is much less represented than that. And it's about 20 to 25% kids of color, right? And so it turns out if you make golf fun and accessible and a team sport that kids want to be around, like, they love it and keep coming back. And so that concept is, so we're rolling out leagues and different ways to sort of make that sort of applicable to other kind of cohorts, if you will. We also, don't have enough people of diversity in our industry, and so we have a couple programs there within our. So you mentioned PGA Reach. That's our foundation. The way to think about it, it has 4 legs. It's got the junior part of it, which I just described as Junior League. It has Hope, which is our veterans program, which is literally saving lives and, trying to sort of roll back the awful suicide rate we have in veterans. And we've got PGA Works, which is our D&I efforts. We have within that a few programs. We have PGA Lead, which is a leadership development program. It's 2 years long. We just hand select people within the industry and put them on a track to teach them to lead, to create, leaders within the business. Within Works, we have fellowships, which, we're rolling out to all our sections around the country. We have scholarships. We sponsor the Works Collegiate Championship every year, which is among the historic Black colleges. Around that, we have a work fair. That's really the more important part than who wins. It's like who gets a job, and we get about 35 companies to show up, and it's a great. The companies are very happy to be there because it's an amazing pool of, talented, healthy, driven kind of, organized type people. So that's been, hugely successful for us. And then the fourth pillar that we have is called a place to play, which is trying to create, the municipal golf courses that were built around the country and they were sort of built in the 1910, 1920 was the big kind of heyday. And that was when President Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson knew that people needed to get out of the factories after the Industrial Revolution, that on Sundays, they're one day off. They wanted to create open spaces. So they built parks and they built baseball fields and they built golf courses. And they built them in urban areas, which is exactly where you'd want them to be because the people could get there. But over time, they've been underinvested in, and kind of fallen into disrepair, and they still exist, but they're not in a form that, is particularly useful. And so we're trying to start a program where we turn those all into public-private partnerships, most likely 501(c)(3)s, or C3s rather, which would create a model that is endowed, that would take the burden off the municipality and put it back on the community to maintain and create great experiences so people can play. And then we'd run all of these programs that I just talked about through there, right? So they become laboratories for golf in a variety of cities around. So, we have, we, again, a 100-year-old institution. We're lucky to have, and I'm very lucky to have as my partner, our first woman president, right? And Susie Whaley, an extraordinary moment. I wouldn't have wanted to have been anywhere else. One of those chill moments when she got elected. And she's done an amazing job, and as an amazing kind of leader and role model. And I think those kinds of people like Sandy Cross, who I referred to before, are going to drive sort of this growth. And in our case, in every case, and look, I worked on Wall Street. We clearly had the same problem. You make a lot of baby steps, right? And then hopefully you look back down the mountain and you realize you actually turned a lot of baby steps into a few giant steps. And I'd say we're not even halfway up the mountain yet by any means, but we're climbing.
Yeah, that was actually one of my next questions, is how do you measure success, right? How do you, as an organization, look and see, are the programs we're doing actually working? Are we creating more opportunities for people of color? Are we making the game more diverse and inclusive? So how do you do that? And also, why is it so important to you personally that this is something that you're focused on?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what phase you're in of where you are, right? I think you measure success slightly differently depending on where you are on that climb up the mountain, right? I think some of it initially is almost anecdotal, like you have green shoots and you celebrate your successes more than you mourn your defeats, and then you keep sort of getting up the next day and doing the right thing. I think we're past that point. We're past the point where it's we can actually measure it now. Let me give you one other statistic, and you say, why would we do this? Well, if you're a young girl and you your mother plays golf, you have an 80% chance of becoming a golfer. If your father plays golf, you have about a 15 to 20% chance of becoming a golfer. If you're a young boy and your father plays golf, you have sort of a 50% chance. If your mother plays golf, you have about another 80% chance of being a golfer.
Wow.
So why there it is, right? I mean, like, you want to, it's not everything, but it's a great anecdote for why it's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, right? If we're trying to grow the game and we're only, 20 to 25% in gender equality, much less racial equality or balance. There's a huge growth, right, that you can get just by sort of getting to your average. And so that's our goal, right? Our goal is to have the PGA Junior League. We're glad it's 35 to 40%, but we want it to be 50%, and we want the game to mirror society, and so we're not going to stop until that happens. Why is that important to me? Again, I can thank my parents. I grew up that way, and I didn't even my household was again was so balanced that I frankly really didn't know there was a problem, right? Because I never crossed my mind as a kid. And then as a grown up, obviously you realize that, we haven't come close to making the strides that we should. I think I've always felt that, you generationally is going to be a lot of these answers, right? That's not that you just wait for that to happen. You have to, sort of, again, be intentional about that, but that you're going to make big leaps kind of generationally. And I think from certain kinds of diversity, and I have, 5 kids between the ages 17 and 25. So I have a, reasonable look into that generation in terms of, gender choice, sort of sexual choice is, I think, completely, sort of no one cares what your choice is, right? I think it's better on gender than we were, for sure, and I think it's better on race than we were, but it isn't where it needs to be. I don't think. I'm surprised that those other two categories haven't come as far as the sexual preference one, if you will. Like why, they were maybe equal when I was growing up, that they were all had the same sort of problems and stigma and bias, right? And I don't think it's been erased to the same degree. And so, again, intellectually, morally, every way, it's just kind of in my DNA, but it's also in my my business, right? Like I think that's really good for business. It's really good to have my senior management group, to have those different perspectives, to have it within the PGA of America, to have it within the industry. We're going to be better, we're going to understand the world better, and we'll be, better prepared to weather any storm and be, and grow. If we don't, I feel like, and part of this is the same thing, it's like, I feel like, we've been a bit of our grandparents' institution protecting our grandparents' game. And now it's time to sort of get to the point where we are creating the game for our kids, right? That's generationally what my job is where's the puck going, not where it's been. And a huge part of that is to look like the world, right? Why wouldn't we look like the world? We're just a game, right?
Yeah. Seth Waugh is CEO of the PGA of America and a member of Rise's board of directors. Seth, really, thank you so much for taking time and joining us here today, Champions Change Your Rise podcast. Really appreciate your perspective and all the work that you're doing to try to grow the game and advance diversity and inclusion in your sport.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the time, Ian, and keep doing all your good work. We get to enjoy it at the board level, but it's fun to watch all the great stuff you're doing. I think sports has this unique platform to really make a difference, right? And that's both a privilege, but it's also an obligation, right? Kids out there listening, people out there listening, you have this incredible platform, and to not use it would be irresponsible, I think. And so I applaud, what the organization is doing.
All right, thanks again to Seth Waugh, CEO of the PGA of America, for joining us today. Be sure to check out new episodes of Champions of Change the Rise podcast every other Tuesday. You can listen and follow us on our website, www.risetowin.org/podcast, or find us, rate us, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and SoundCloud. Follow Rise on Twitter and Instagram at Rise to Win, and on Facebook at Rise to Win ORG. That's RISETOWIN. Finally, if you want to follow me, I'm at IC Cutler on Twitter. Our thanks again to Seth Waugh and the PGA, and to all of you for listening. I'm Ian Cutler with Rise.